The enemy broadcast carried the words with pride. The American pilot was in their hands. Across hostile networks in the Belgrade region, voices rang out in triumph, claiming a U.S. Air Force F-16 had been shot down on reconnaissance and its pilot captured. At 29, Captain Elena Cross, with dark curls tucked beneath her helmet, sharp hazel eyes quick to read threats, and hands steady enough to fly when others stayed grounded, had pulled the ejection handle after her fighter took a missile hit over enemy territory. Soldiers tracked her parachute as it dropped, boxed in her landing zone with superior numbers, and relayed the news of her capture up the chain as though it were the greatest propaganda prize. An American pilot alive. What none of them realized was that Elena Cross wasn't anyone's prisoner. She had placed herself exactly where the mission demanded, a mission absent from every official record. The crippled F-16, the controlled ejection, the staged capture, each piece formed part of the boldest infiltration attempt the Air Force had ever mounted. 72 hours later, Elena re-emerged behind enemy lines, carrying firepower enough to wipe out their entire command. The same forces who had celebrated would learn the hard way. The real danger wasn't catching an American pilot, but failing to grasp what she came to do once no one was watching. For 7 years, Captain Elena Cross had flown combat sorties for the United States Air Force when she stepped forward for an operation senior brass, first dismissed as unattainable. Raised in Clearwater, Florida, the daughter of a maintenance officer who kept jets alive for decades, Elena had absorbed aircraft systems long before she drove a car, grasping aerodynamics and weapons long before most cadets even enrolled. At 18, she entered the Air Force Academy, crushed every test placed before her, and left near the top of her class with an aerospace engineering degree. Flight training came naturally. Instructors remarked she handled fighters with an instinct it normally took years in the sky to master. By 25, she'd logged multiple tours in F-16 Fighting Falcons across hostile skies, flying recon, dropping close support for troops, and hunting enemy aircraft over advanced defenses. Yet her skills reached past the cockpit. She had pushed through survival schools far harsher than standard programs, signing up for courses designed for special ops units. There, she learned evasion beyond the manuals, hand-to-hand tactics fit for hostile terrain, and the craft of demolitions and sabotage, skills few pilots touched. Elena's drive wasn't thrill-chasing, it was cold realism. Flying deep into enemy air meant accepting you might be shot down and would need to survive alone until someone came. That mindset became priceless when Air Force Special Operations Command brought her a mission that sounded like pure fiction. Colonel David Rourke, who commanded a shadow unit, summoned her into a secured briefing site. "Captain Cross," Rourke said evenly, "what I'm about to show you carries classification so high you'll need to sign additional papers before we proceed. If you walk away after hearing this, you'll never repeat it to a soul. Clear?" "Yes, sir." The colonel lit up a secure display showing satellite images of hardened enemy compounds buried inside hostile ground. "Belgrade is building an advanced air defense network, one that could cripple NATO flights. Intelligence also points to their work in cyber systems capable of undermining every military channel we operate." He stopped, gauging her expression. "These facilities are sealed tighter than anything we've faced. Conventional strikes fail. Their sensors spot aircraft miles out, either shooting them down or emptying the base before impact. And infiltration on foot is a dead end. The terrain and layered security make the site effectively impenetrable to special operations teams." Elena scanned the satellite imagery, already guessing where the briefing was headed. "Sir, You need someone who can get inside that facility when they least expect an intrusion, she said. Correct, came the reply. The only way in without tripping every defense is to make the enemy think they've already won, that they shot down an American jet and taken the pilot alive, turning triumph into complacency. Elena understood immediately. So you want me to be deliberately downed, let them think they've captured me, and then use that cover to infiltrate and sabotage from inside their perimeter? She asked. Exactly. You'll fly a combat sortie, take plausible surface-to-air damage, eject into a pre-selected landing zone near their main facility, and let them parade a supposed prize while you do the real work. While they celebrate and process a prisoner, I'll be conducting reconnaissance and moving into position for the strike on their command node, Elena finished. Major Sophia Vance outlined the tactical plan. Specialist kit will be concealed inside what appears to be a standard survival pack. Demolition charges, covert communications, compact weapons. And you'll be fully briefed on layouts, patrol patterns, and primary targets, while extraction assets wait to pull you out. Elena absorbed the risks. If it goes wrong, and they capture me before I act, I become a prisoner of war and face everything that entails, she said. There's no official authorization. If you're truly captured, the U.S. government will deny knowledge of the operation. You will be presented simply as a pilot shot down on legitimate reconnaissance. Nothing more, Colonel David Rourke confirmed. Elena weighed the audacity, the danger, and the potential payoff. Sir, what are our odds? She asked. Roughly 40% chance of full mission success, 30% partial success with extraction, 20% partial success without extraction, and about 10% chance of capture or death, he replied. Those aren't good odds. No, they're not. Which is why participation is voluntary. You can refuse with no impact on your career or reputation, he added. Elena looked again at the satellite photos, parsing every weakness and opening, and then made the choice that would define her career and could stop hostile cyber capabilities from crippling NATO operations. Sir, I volunteer, she said. 3 weeks of intense preparation followed, and Elena drilled facility layouts until she could navigate them blindfolded. She trained with demolitions experts on placing charges to take down critical infrastructure, learned advanced escape and evasion techniques tailored to the terrain she'd operate in, and memorized enemy security protocols, command relationships, and the timing of shift changes that would open brief windows for infiltration. Her flight gear was modified to hide specialist equipment. Demolitions disguised as survival items, encrypted comms tucked into standard radios, and compact weapon systems masked as emergency beacons, while her suit gained secret pockets for tools, improvised entry devices, and the technical kit needed for sabotage, and the mission briefing left nothing to chance. Elena would fly an F-16 on an authorized reconnaissance sortie, and at a prearranged point, she'd maneuver into range of a particular surface-to-air battery that intelligence predicted would engage her, taking damage that looked authentic but left her able to control where she ejected. She would come down about 3 kilometers from the primary facility, let enemy forces converge on her parachute landing, and allow initial contact that seemed like an attempted escape, but ended in apparent capture by overwhelming numbers. Once they believed they'd bagged an American pilot, she'd be moved toward their command facility for interrogation and propaganda use. During transport or initial processing, she would slip custody, find concealment within the complex, and begin reconnaissance to pick the best sabotage targets, and at a set time, 72 hours after ejection, she would trigger simultaneous demolitions against the cyber center, air defense node, and main communications hub to cripple their emerging capabilities and create the chaos she'd need to get away. Extraction helicopters would be staged to retrieve her at designated rally points outside the facility's immediate security perimeter. But the whole plan demanded precision timing and flawless action beyond what most pilots ever trained for. Elena had prepared for this mission specifically because stopping hostile cyber capabilities from threatening NATO was worth risks most wouldn't accept. And on a Tuesday morning from a forward operating location, her F-16 took off as part of a routine reconnaissance package. Nothing in the flight plan singled out her aircraft. She climbed to 28,000 feet over international airspace while monitoring enemy air defenses. And at the predetermined corridor, she bent her path into hostile airspace to bring the chosen missile battery onto her threat warning, exactly as planned, because evasive maneuvers would have ruined the controlled engagement she needed. The surface-to-air missile streaked off the launcher and tore through the sky at nearly Mach 3, and Elena held steady until the final possible second, letting the weapon close in so the damage would look entirely authentic, while still keeping enough command of her jet to carry out the ejection plan. And when the missile's proximity fuse went off about 50 meters away, the explosion ripped the tail of her F-16 apart, shredding hydraulics and instantly stripping away control of the aircraft. The hit was brutal but not fatal, exactly as designed, and for the next 90 seconds she fought with the crippled fighter, making it seem like she was desperately trying to hold it together and maybe limp back toward friendly skies, while enemy monitors tracked her emergency calls and heard her voice describing worsening systems and imminent failure. At the precise moment she reached the predetermined point directly above the designated drop zone, she pulled the handle and the ejection rocket slammed her clear of the braking aircraft, her parachute snapping open automatically as she drifted downward into hostile air while enemy forces below erupted in cheers, believing they had scored a clean victory. From her harness, she spotted armored vehicles and troop trucks converging on her landing path, tracking her descent and racing to seize her the instant she touched the ground. And she came down in rough, broken terrain about 3 kilometers from the main objective. Her training took over instantly. She bundled up the chute, switched on the emergency beacon exactly as they would expect, and moved away from the landing site in a way that looked like a panicked escape effort, but deliberately lacked the finesse of someone who knew the best escape routes. Intelligence had predicted a longer window before contact, but within just 8 minutes, enemy forces were already on top of her, arriving faster than expected and creating immediate complications. Roughly 20 armed soldiers closed in before she had moved even 400 meters. And Elena knew this was the decisive moment where she had to look like she was resisting while also ensuring eventual capture. A delicate balance that demanded precision acting. She pulled her sidearm and fired warning rounds to show she was armed and fighting back, but carefully avoided hitting anyone, moving from cover to cover in a way that showed she had training but not the polished tactics of a special operations operative. The enemy swarmed with overwhelming numbers, boxed her in, and drove her to the point where continuing to resist would have meant using lethal force she could not justify if she was to keep up the disguise of a stranded pilot. She slowed, feigned exhaustion from her escape attempt, let them close in, and finally raised her hands to signal surrender, giving up only when it appeared she had no other option. The soldiers advanced cautiously, disarmed her, zip-tied her wrists behind her back, and searched through her kit, finding only standard-issue survival gear that reinforced the story that she was nothing more than a downed pilot. Their radio chatter, which Elena understood clearly thanks to her foreign language training, crackled with triumphant reports. American pilot captured, female, captain rank. No injuries. They loaded her into a military truck and began the drive toward the command facility, the exact place Elena needed to be. And during the 30-minute transport, she watched her captors and noted their procedures, seeing professionals who were steadily growing more relaxed because they believed the hard part was over. They had secured a valuable prisoner who, in their minds, posed no further threat. An assumption that would prove deadly. The compound they brought her to was a sprawling cluster of modern buildings ringed by layered security, electronic surveillance, and checkpoints, and she was taken to a processing area where intelligence officers prepared to exploit their captured American pilot, which is where her real operation began. The interrogation room matched the briefs: concrete walls, a metal table, basic chairs, and monitoring gear. And two intelligence officers entered confident that a traumatized, downed pilot would break. Not knowing Elena had trained with the world's best interrogation resistance instructors, had studied enemy techniques for this mission, and needed to keep her cover intact for roughly 6 hours while she set the chance to vanish. The questioning followed predictable beats: identity confirmation, mission details, aircraft capabilities, psychological pressure. And Elena fed them answers consistent with someone shot down on legitimate reconnaissance. Nothing classified beyond what could be gleaned publicly. Enough cooperation to convince them they were winning. After 3 hours, they moved her to a holding cell while they parsed her responses and prepared follow-ups. And that lower security room, electronically locked with periodic patrols rather than constant surveillance, was the opening she'd been waiting for because during interrogation, she'd been subtly working her restraints, loosening the zip ties with practiced motion so the guards would not notice. Once the cell door clicked shut, she set to work using tools hidden in her flight suit that had survived the cursory search, lockpicks disguised as uniform buttons, and defeated the electronic lock inside 20 minutes, slipping into a maintenance corridor her briefs had flagged as rarely patrolled. Moving with the quiet confidence of long training, she threaded the facility using the layouts she'd memorized, her objectives razor clear. Reach the Cyber Warfare Center, the Air Defense Command Node, and the Communications Hub. Plant precision charges to destroy critical systems while avoiding collateral casualties that would hand the enemy propaganda, and set them to detonate simultaneously to maximize effect and sow confusion that would aid her escape. She had 68 hours to reconfirm targets, establish concealments, and settle into the facility's shadows before the execution window. And what followed was 72 hours of the most intense covert work of her career. Slipping through maintenance shafts and utility corridors among hundreds of personnel, using stolen credentials and technical skill to access secured spaces, placing calibrated charges that would cripple emerging capabilities. Surviving on minimal water and energy bars stashed in her survival kit, and catnapping in hidden service bays between ops, she monitored enemy channels with her concealed radio, mapping patrol patterns and windows for movement, and on the second night, reached the Cyber Warfare Center, a bank of high-end servers driving tools to disrupt NATO communications, where she set shaped charges to destroy equipment without collapsing structures or harming nearby staff. On the third morning, she infiltrated the Air Defense Command Node and emplaced demolitions that would blind radar arrays and sever command links across the regional air defense network. And that afternoon, she finished at the primary communications hub, placing charges to isolate the compound and stop them from calling for coordinated reinforcements. With all devices primed, Elena prepared for exfiltration and, at exactly 2300 hours, 72 hours after ejection, she initiated the demolition sequence, triggering coordinated explosions that tore through the cyber center's server rooms, obliterated radar and comms gear in the air defense node, and collapsed the communications hub, severing links to external command and destroying months or years of development in cascading fire and ruin. Chaos swallowed the compound as personnel scrambled to deal with multiple simultaneous crises, convinced the attack came from outside rather than from within their own perimeter, and Elena used that confusion as her cover. Moving through panicked corridors toward the perimeter fence she'd scoped out, breaching it with tools from her concealed kit, and slipping into rough terrain beyond the immediate security zone while the facility burned behind her and its cyber and air defense capabilities lay in ruins. 40 minutes after the blasts, she reached the first extraction rally point and watched as Special Operations MH-60s, staged in international airspace and now able to cross low because the air defenses were blinded, slipped into hostile territory and picked her up at the agreed coordinates while she calmly monitored the enemy chatter, still trying to make sense of the devastation. And the helicopter crews stared as they listened to intercepted broadcasts that had celebrated her capture 3 days earlier. They broadcast that they'd shot you down and taken you prisoner, and now saw Elena Cross waiting calmly for extraction. How are you even standing here after wiping out their command compound? Elena smiled as she climbed into the helicopter. They captured exactly who I needed them to capture, she thought, because they had no idea what that meant until it was already too late. The flight back to friendly lines lasted 90 minutes, slicing across hostile airspace, now convulsing with forces trying to respond to a devastating strike they hadn't seen coming. And when Elena touched down at the forward operating base, she was met by Colonel David Rourke and a senior Air Force general she didn't recognize, the general studying her for a long beat before speaking. Captain Cross, I've reviewed the after-action reports. You were shot down, captured, escaped custody, conducted 72 hours of solo covert operations inside a hostile facility, destroyed 3 critical nodes simultaneously, and extracted with 0 casualties. Accurate? Yes, sir, she replied. Mission complete. The colonel's face hardened. What you accomplished will never be officially acknowledged. The enemy will attribute the attack to some special operations element and never realize it was a single Air Force pilot they once paraded as a prize. He paused, then added, But know this. You've denied hostile cyber and air defense capabilities that would have threatened thousands of coalition personnel. You saved lives and prevented systems that could have shifted the regional balance. The ripple effects of Elena's operation echoed through classified planning for years. Analysts estimated the destroyed cyber warfare center set their capabilities back 3 to 5 years. The ruined air defense command node opened tactical windows. Coalition forces later exploited, and the demolished communications hub severed links that degraded operational cohesion across the region. Perhaps more important than equipment losses was the lesson that conventional assumptions about pilot roles were catastrophically wrong. The notion that fighter pilots were only aviators who became helpless on the ground was destroyed by her success, and within 18 months, the Air Force had stood up training programs that folded advanced survival, escape and evasion, and basic sabotage into pilot curricula. Elena was promoted to major and offered roles in special operations planning that put her unique blend of flight expertise and ground tradecraft to use. She accepted a billet training the next generation of combat pilots in the expanded survival and resistance syllabus. Years later, speaking at the Air Force Weapons School without touching classified specifics, she reflected that when she was shot down, the enemy celebrated because they believed they'd captured an American pilot and felt victorious rather than threatened, and that very underestimation gave her tactical advantages they never anticipated because they stopped looking for threats once they assumed the threat was neutralized, an assumption that cost them everything. She made clear the takeaway wasn't that every pilot must become a special operations trooper, but that you should never limit what people can do by pigeonholing them by title. She had been a fighter pilot, yes, but she'd also trained for scenarios beyond the cockpit, and, when circumstances demanded capabilities outside her aircraft, she had them because she'd prepared for possibilities most assumed would never happen. Elena Cross's mission became whispered legend in classified circles. The pilot who let herself be taken so she could destroy an enemy's burgeoning cyber and air defense network. And new pilots entering combat aviation learned the same quiet lesson. The fight doesn't end when your aircraft is lost. Capability extends beyond the controls. And being underestimated can be the single most valuable tactical advantage you'll ever have. Because sometimes the most dangerous outcome for an enemy isn't the downing of an American pilot. It's celebrating that pilot's capture without realizing the mission has only begun. And that was exactly what happened when enemy forces broadcast their triumph until 72 hours later, Elena Cross reappeared behind their lines, having destroyed their cyber warfare center, their air defense command node, and their communications hub in coordinated demolitions that crippled their emerging capabilities and proved that a fighter pilot is never more dangerous than when underestimated. And the cultural transformation sparked by her mission spread far beyond new tactics. Within 3 years, the Air Force had fundamentally reshaped how it prepared aviators, abandoning the old belief that a pilot's value ended with a downed jet, and embracing a doctrine that recognized them as intelligence assets, tactical operators, and potential ground combatants who required preparation for contingencies beyond the cockpit. And survival training was rebuilt with modules patterned directly on Elena's mission profile, teaching not only evasion but also exploitation of enemy assumptions, reconnaissance in hostile facilities, and sabotage operations if needed. Colonel David Rourke, who had recruited her, testified before Congress that Captain Cross's operation proved their old model dangerously narrow, that they had trained pilots to fly but assumed their usefulness ended once their aircraft was gone. And she had demonstrated that with proper preparation, they could achieve effects once reserved for special operations forces. But perhaps the greatest change was psychological, because after her mission, every combat pilot understood that being shot down did not mean helplessness, that capture did not mean failure, and that their training extended far beyond flying. Enemies who once viewed captured pilots as propaganda trophies began to fear them as potential infiltrators, uncertain if they were facing prisoners or saboteurs. And that doubt itself increased survival and mission success. 5 years later, when another American pilot was shot down, hostile communications revealed caution instead of celebration. American pilot down, proceed with maximum security protocols, because they assumed specialized training and possible sabotage, and that pilot, trained under the post-cross curriculum, successfully evaded capture and was extracted after 3 days, helped ironically by enemy forces so focused on locking down sabotage that they created holes in their capture net. Elena Cross had not only completed the impossible, she had changed how enemies saw downed Americans, how the Air Force trained its aviators, and how planners understood the spectrum of skills that personnel could wield when pushed beyond their primary role. And sometimes the greatest legacy isn't the mission itself, but the transformation it sparks, creating capabilities and opportunities that keep saving lives long after the original operation ends. Thanks for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, you can subscribe to Captain Joe's Stories for more incredible missions like this one.